I know that the narrative has been that China won. I'm not sure there was any real winner in this. I think China demonstrated that, yes, it could go toe-to-toe with the United States, but both sides, reduced the tariffs. China had called for the United States to completely erase the tariffs before it even sat down at the table. I think people have forgotten that, and the administration didn't do that. They did come to the table with, a pretty concrete proposal on how to control the fentanyl precursor exports that has been so central to the Trump administration. And they took off all of the non-tariff punishments that they had put on the administration, things like the export controls on critical minerals and rare earths. So I want to level set a little bit, just because I think, let's understand the full sort of scope of this negotiation. In terms of where China goes next, I think what we've seen already is that China is going to move very aggressively to diversify their exports away from the United States. In part, there was a 20% drop in Chinese exports to the U.S. There was a 20% increase in Chinese exports to Southeast Asia over the past month or so. And even, I think, in the sort of low margin, factories, apparel, toys, et cetera, they're all talking about how to reduce their dependence on the U.S. market. So I think we've really introduced a pretty significant new factor into the Chinese thinking about the dependence of about the reliability of the United States. I think that's the big next thing for China.
So, Elizabeth, if you're China, are they looking to really kind of go it alone vis-a-vis the West? Or do they feel like it's in their best long-term interest to have a stronger relationship with the West, broadly defined?
No, I think they're definitely not looking to go it alone and move away from the West. I mean, they've made a big play over the past couple of months, because of the sort of overall chaos that the Trump administration has induced globally with these global tariffs. They've made a big play to try to assert themselves as the global stabilizing force. They've gone to Australia and said, please join hands. They've gone to Europe. I think they would love to revive the comprehensive agreement on investment that, sunk about 8 years ago now. They'd love to bring that back. I don't think the Europeans are interested, but the Chinese would like to do that. So I think, their strategy is to try to present themselves as a responsible and reliable trade and investment partner where the U.S. is not. And they'll do that, with the advanced market economies and with the global South.
Liz, we were talking, and this goes back, I can't, this is like when she was at Michigan as a freshman. This is 10 years ago. Elizabeth Economy here on China's rise in Southeast Asia. One of the themes we're addressing, Elizabeth Economy, is that China has other outros. It's not a bilateral outcome, or dare I say unilateral, for Mr. Trump, and that you can funnel China trade through Vietnam, through Malaysia, through other nations as well. Is that just a given for you?
I think certainly we know that, we've seen that, and frankly, in the Biden administration, we became aware of that when I served with Secretary Raimondo in the Commerce Department in sort of some of the critical technologies like advanced chips. That became a real problem because this was a good way to avoid the export controls. Actually, it was U.S. chips going through Southeast Asia and to China. So that corridor, which works both ways, can be problematic. And I do think that's something that the Trump administration negotiations with countries in Southeast Asia, with Mexico, with others, they're trying to plug that hole to prevent China from doing that sort of third-party shipping through to the U.S. to avoid any kind of restrictions or tariffs or other controls that the U.S. might be placing on Chinese products. So to their credit, I think the Trump administration is trying to manage that process.
Elizabeth, in the world of global technology, there appears to be, a Cold War that is developing between China and the West. A, do you agree with that? And B, how do you think that might play out going forward?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that China began the process of sort of technological decoupling around Made in China 2025 back in 2015. And we've talked about that before on this show, basically China's effort to ensure that its companies dominated in the manufacturing of components in 10 critical cutting edge areas of technology, like new materials and AI and EVs, and that then they became these global champions. So they started, by trying to close off their market in many areas so that Chinese companies would dominate. I think the U.S. has been more concerned about the strategic and security ramifications of some of these technologies. And so we saw, beginning with the first Trump administration through Biden and now Trump again, a dramatic increase in the use of our economic tools like export controls, in and outbound investment screening, trying to move supply chains, out of any sort of sole source dependency, but particularly in a country like China, where we feel that they're not a reliable partner, where they do use their economic leverage in coercive ways. So there's been, I think, this pull and this, away between China and the advanced market democracies. Whether that continues, I think, remains to be seen. I mean, President Trump, has sort of thrown a wrench in the plan. He talked about this massive reset in the U.S.-China relationship as a result of these talks, in Geneva. It's not clear what that means, but he did say, we are going to open our market to them. They're going to open their market to us. I don't know what he means by that, but one possibility would be to permit some of those companies, Chinese companies like CATL, which produce batteries, to actually manufacture in the U.S. So we may see some rethinking about that technology balance.
Liz, 30 seconds. Should we let China EVs into America?
I have to say this is an area where I think we need to protect our market, or we need to find a way to, I think, thoughtfully address the subsidies that China puts in not only EVs, all of those Made in China 2025 products. I think until we do that, the tariffs are probably a good move.